Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, I'd like to discuss your recent real estate acquisition. On June 15, 2025, you and your partner, Riley Roberts, bought a $4.2 million estate in Wesley Heights, one of the most elite neighborhoods in D.C. You paid for it entirely in cash, no mortgage, just a straight $4.2 million payment. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino's voice echoed through the House Ethics Committee room. He wasn't yelling or being theatrical. He was simply laying out the facts with that steady, caught red-handed tone that made every syllable sting. He stopped for a second. He wanted that figure to really sink in. Your official salary as a member of Congress is $174,000 a year. You've held this office for 6 years now. Even if you hadn't spent a single cent of that income, which we know isn't the case, you'd only have a little over $1 million. So, I have one very straightforward question for you. Where exactly did the other $3 million come from? Nothing but silence. A heavy, suffocating wave of silence filled the air. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat there at the witness table. She was flanked by 3 high-priced lawyers in custom-tailored suits. Nobody in that room missed the blatant irony of the situation. The Democratic socialist who built her career attacking the wealthy elite was now huddled with attorneys who likely billed more per hour than most of her voters earned in an entire day. The date was November 3rd, 2025. This was a closed-door House Ethics Committee session held deep in the Capitol's basement. While it was technically off-limits to the public and the media, every word was being caught for the official record in a room packed with committee members, wall-to-wall staff, and busy stenographers. Everyone present could sense that a major bombshell was about to drop. AOC was dressed in a burgundy blazer over a black top, wearing gold hoops and her trademark bold red lipstick. It was the perfectly crafted image of the relatable, working-class representative from the Bronx, one of the common people. She had transformed that specific look into a multi-million-dollar brand, landing magazine covers, fashion spotlights, and countless viral moments. But sitting across from Dan Bongino and his stacks of financial evidence, that usual confidence seemed to be fading. You could see the tension tightening in her jaw. Her fingers were white-knuckled as she gripped the edge of the table. Her gaze kept flickering toward her legal team, searching for help that wasn't coming. She had walked in thinking this was just about that Met Gala dress drama from the year before. That tax the rich gown had been the perfect bait for conservatives. To her, it was old news, something easily defended and already hashed out on social media. She had no clue she was walking into a 14-month FBI financial probe proving she'd amassed a fortune by exploiting the very working-class people she claimed to fight for. Bongino remained perfectly composed at the table. He was a veteran NYPD officer and former Secret Service agent who had guarded presidents, now serving as the FBI's deputy director. He looked every bit the professional who had spent his life tracing money and pinning down criminals. Beside him sat Special Agent Jennifer Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit, her laptop open and ready to pull up any necessary file. Right in front of Bongino were 2 massive binders stamped with official FBI seals. He had spent the entire morning going over every single page one last time. It was all there. Bank statements, wire logs, LLC filings, tax returns, property deeds, and photos of luxury homes and designer clothes. 14 months of hard detective work had been boiled down to undeniable evidence that no amount of spin could fix. AOC attempted to address the question about her new home. Her response sounded defensive and heavily scripted. "My personal finances are a private matter. This is nothing more than the harassment of a woman of color who has the courage to stand up to the system. Your finances became a matter of public concern the moment you bought that house. Bongino cut her off with a calm authority. You purchased a mansion that's impossible to afford on a public servant's salary while pretending to champion the working man. Let me show you exactly where that cash originated. He pulled out a series of bank statements and slid them across the table to the committee members with practiced ease. The only sound left in the room was the sliding of paper against the polished wood table. There were 3 specific wire transfers, all made within a week of your property purchase. He gestured to the highlighted lines on the documents. On June 8th, $1.2 million arrived from an LC named the Progressive Future Fund. That's a Delaware-registered entity with 0 donor transparency. On June 10th, another $1.5 million came from the Grassroots Action Network, another Delaware shell company with hidden donors. Then on June 12th, a final $1.5 million was sent from the Democratic Advancement Coalition. And to no one's surprise, that's another Delaware-based LLC. No names, no donors, nothing. He looked up from the files. He stared directly into her eyes. These aren't small dollar donations from regular people sending $15 because they believe in your message. These are dark money tools, shell corporations designed specifically to mask the true source of the cash. But we managed to crack them. It took us months of work, but we tracked every single cent. Every dollar leads back to the exact same source. He paused for effect, letting the tension build. They all come from progressive donor networks linked directly to George Soros. Billionaire money was funneled through these shell companies directly into your personal LLC to buy you a mansion. The room began to buzz with whispers as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was far more explosive than anyone had anticipated. Bongino wasn't finished yet. He clicked a remote, and a graphic flashed onto the screen at the front of the room. It was a flowchart mapping out the movement of money through several different organizations. Every single connection was traced with a distinct colored line. "Let me walk you through how this works," he said, standing up and moving toward the display. "Start right here at the very top. Open Society Foundations. That is George Soros's primary financial vehicle. From there, the money flows straight to the Democracy Alliance. That's the coordination hub where billionaire progressive donors decide who gets funded and exactly how much they receive. From the Democracy Alliance, the cash splits into those 3 Delaware LLCs I mentioned earlier. And within the same week in June, the money from all 3 flows directly into your personal LLC. $1.2 million, $1.5 million, and another $1.5 million, totaling exactly $4.2 million, the precise price tag of your mansion. He turned back around to face her directly. You've built your entire political identity on fighting billionaires, attacking dark money in politics, and claiming to represent the working class against the wealthy elite. But the truth is, you've been bought by the very billionaires you claim to oppose. You've pocketed the same dark money you bash every day on Twitter, using it to buy a mansion in one of the richest neighborhoods in America. AOC started to speak up in protest, but Bongino silenced her with a slight wave of his hand. And the mansion is only where we're starting. That's just the beginning of the story. Let me show you the rest of the evidence. There's your boyfriend receiving $1.6 million in campaign consulting fees for work that no one can even identify. No one can explain those $35,000 Met Gala tickets that clearly violated gift rules. Then there's the $150,000 in designer clothes you wore but never reported to anyone. The book deal arranged by publishers funded directly by Soros. a luxury lifestyle paid for by working-class supporters who actually believe you're one of them. He opened his first binder with a slow, deliberate motion. The sound of the spine cracking echoed loudly through the silent room. I am going to show this committee exactly how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez turned democratic socialism into a personal enrichment scheme. AOC's lead attorney, Mark Elias, one of the most expensive and well-connected lawyers in the Democratic Party, leaned forward to object, but Chairman Michael Guest cut him off with a sharp look. Mr. Elias, the deputy director will present his findings first. Then your client will have her opportunity to respond. Bongino nodded to the chairman and then turned his focus back to AOC. His voice became quieter and more cutting. You entered Congress in 2019 with a net worth of only about $7,000. You had some student loan debt and you were working as a bartender. That was the story, right? The classic working-class narrative that got you elected in the first place. 6 years later, you're worth approximately $4.88 million. That is not a typo. You're worth $4.88 million on a salary of just $174,000 per year. He let that statement hang in the air for a long moment. The math simply doesn't work. It's impossible unless you've been focusing on something other than serving your constituents. And I'm going to show you exactly what that something is. He settled back into his chair and fully opened the binder. Let's start with that mansion. And with those words, he began laying out a case designed to destroy everything Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had built. The carefully crafted image of the Democratic Socialist bartender from the Bronx was about to be exposed as the biggest fraud in modern progressive politics. To understand how we reached this point, how a working-class hero ended up in a $4 million mansion bought with billionaire cash, you have to go back 12 hours. Back to when she walked into her office thinking this was just another Republican attack she could tweet her way through. 12 hours earlier, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in her congressional office reviewing the subpoena that had been delivered by courier the previous week. The document was frustratingly vague in its description. It was a subpoena to testify before the House Committee on Ethics. The subject: financial irregularities and potential violations of House rules. That was all it said. There were no details or specifics, just a date, a time, a location, and a warning that failing to appear would result in contempt charges. Her communications director, Saikat Chakrabarti, sat across from her, scrolling through his tablet. He had been with her since the very beginning, recruiting her to run through Justice Democrats in 2017, managing her shocking primary upset of Joe Crowley, and helping build her into a national icon. He looked up from his screen with a dismissive wave of his hand. They're just fishing. This is definitely about that Met Gala dress from last year. The Republicans are still so mad about the tax the rich message that they just can't let it go. They're trying to spin this into some kind of ethics breach. AOC gave a quick nod while flicking through Twitter on her smartphone. Her mentions were full of support, just like they always are. Her army of followers was already out in force, defending her against a hearing that hadn't even started yet. We've already cleared all this up. Aurora let me borrow the dress. That ticket was strictly for work. The Met Gala is all about raising funds for arts education. I've disclosed every single thing that was required. This is just more harassment coming my way because I actually get things done. Just then, her phone started ringing. It was Mark Elias joining the call. His voice crackled over the speaker with that high-priced lawyer confidence that runs $1,500 an hour. The subpoena is vague on purpose, which tells me they're just fishing for something. It could be about the Met Gala, or maybe it's some delay in campaign finance reporting. We've had a couple of late filings, but there's nothing even close to criminal there. It might even be a response to those baseless FEC complaints from right-wing groups. "So, what's my play here?" AOC asked. Elias didn't miss a beat. He never did. "We keep the messaging simple. You're a working-class woman of color who's a threat to the establishment. Every time they attack you, it's just proof that you're being effective. Republicans are scared to death of you because you fight for regular people instead of big corporations. This is nothing but political persecution dressed up as oversight. Stick to that script and you'll be just fine." Sykot pulled up some polling numbers on his tablet and turned the screen toward her. "Your approval rating in the district is sitting at 71%. Nationally, you've got a 68% favorability rating among Democrats. Your Twitter following just crossed the 13.2 million mark. You're more of a household name than most senators. This hearing is only going to boost your fame and make the GOP look petty and obsessed." AOC felt that old confidence surging back. She'd weathered everything thrown her way over the last 6 years. Trump had labeled her a communist almost every single week. Fox News had covered her as if she were the one running for president. Right-wing media had cooked up endless scandals. Her college costs, where she actually lived, her boyfriend's past, her family tree, and even that college dance video that was supposed to be a big scandal. But none of it ever stuck. Every single attack just made her more popular with her base, more famous across the country, and more powerful within her own party. She'd mastered the playbook. When you're attacked, claim victim status. Call it racism or sexism, depending on who's coming after you. Mobilize that massive online following. Get the friendly media outlets to jump to your defense. Then, turn the whole thing into a fundraising machine. Within 48 hours of any drama, she'd usually pull in $500,000 from small donors that are ready to back her against the establishment. Why would things be any different this time? What AOC didn't know, and couldn't have possibly known, was that this wasn't some political hit job. This was a full-blown FBI investigation into financial crimes. For over a year, Special Agent Jennifer Martinez and her squad had been silently tracking cash flows, subpoenaing bank records, tracing wires across various states, and digging through Delaware corporate filings to build a rock-solid case, the way prosecutors do when they know they only have one chance. And they'd found something massive, that couldn't be explained away with a viral thread on Twitter. At that very moment, 3,000 miles away at FBI headquarters in Quantico, Dan Bongino was going through the final prep with his team. The walls of the secure room were plastered with flowcharts showing exactly how money moved between organizations. There were photos of the mansion she'd purchased, screenshots of designer dresses from A-list events, bank statements covered in yellow highlighter, and wire transfer logs. A complete visual map of systematic financial fraud covering every inch of the room. Bongino was 51 now, but he still had the build of a man who protected presidents, even if he spent most of his time behind a desk these days. He'd grown up in Queens, not far from where AOC claimed her Bronx roots. Except he actually lived the life she only used for her narrative. He'd worked the toughest streets in New York as a cop and protected President Bush during the high-stakes years after 9/11. He knew what real public service was, and he definitely knew a grifter when he saw one. Special Agent Jennifer Martinez stood by a whiteboard covered in complex timelines and financial math. She was 45 and had spent her entire career following the money. She started at the SEC chasing insider traders before spending 15 years in the FBI's white-collar crime unit taking down corrupt elites. And this case was one of the most brazen ones she'd ever seen. Picture a sitting member of Congress who raked in millions while her entire public persona was built on fighting for the poor. "This is our final walkthrough," Martinez noted, clicking through slides on an encrypted monitor. We have been running a financial investigation for 14 months now. It all started when the Office of Congressional Ethics flagged some fishy deposits into an LLC owned by AOC and her partner Riley Roberts. So, we started pulling the records ourselves. What we uncovered goes way beyond anything the OCE even imagined. She pulled up a graph that tracked her net worth over the years. The line stayed almost flat from 2019 to 2021, but then it spiked at a massive angle starting in 2022. Back when she first entered Congress in January 2019, her financial disclosures showed a net worth of only about $7,000. She even reported having $17,000 in student loan debt. With a checking account balance under $2,000, pretty standard for a 29-year-old bartender, which was her actual job, Martinez switched the display to the current figures. Today, based on every asset we have identified and verified, her net worth is sitting at roughly $4.8 million. Bongino stared at the graph. That vertical climb was just absurd. A congressional salary is only $174,000. Even if she didn't spend a single dime for 6 years, which is impossible, she would only have maybe $1 million. So, where did that other $3.8 million actually come from? It's coming from several different sources, Martinez said, pulling up the next part of her presentation. Let me walk you through every revenue stream we have identified and documented. She kicked things off with the boyfriend's involvement. Riley Roberts operates a firm called Digital Outreach Strategies. Over the last 4 years, this company has pulled in $1.6 million from PACs that are tied directly to AOC. There is Justice Democrats, which is the group that recruited her in the first place. Then there is Courage to Change, her own personal leadership PAC. And finally, Brand New Congress, which is closely linked with Justice Democrats. Special Agent Tom Wilson weighed in from where he sat reviewing files at the conference table. We did a deep dive into their actual work and interviewed officials at these PACs under oath. We asked them point-blank what Riley actually delivered in exchange for $1.6 million. And do you want to know what we found? Absolutely nothing. There isn't a single website we can attribute back to him. No email campaigns exist. There aren't any social media strategies we can identify as his work. When we pushed the PAC leaders for answers, they got evasive, claiming he consulted on digital strategy. Yet, there are 0 documents, reports, or emails showing his advice. Just invoices and payments. Martinez gave a quick nod. It is a textbook corruption play. You just hire your partner's company. You pay them using your donor's cash. No real work is ever required. The money flows to the partner and becomes household income. The politician gets rich personally, and everyone keeps just enough plausible deniability. She moved on to the next slide covering the book deal and speaking fees. Her book hit the shelves in 2022. She has raked in about $800,000 between advances and royalties. But this is where the story gets really shady. The ownership structure of the publisher appeared on the screen. The publisher is actually partially owned by an investment firm that gets funding from Soros-linked donors and major bulk buyers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of purchases were made by the very same PACs that pay her boyfriend. The Courage to Change. PAC dropped $180,000 on her books. Justice Democrats spent another $120,000. These aren't organic sales going to real readers. This is just money laundering disguised as a book deal. Wilson added a bit more context to the situation. We reached out to bookstore owners. We asked if they ever saw these massive bulk orders from these organizations. They never did. In most cases, the books went straight into a storage unit, The whole setup was just a mechanism to funnel cash to her through padded royalty checks. Martinez clicked through to the main attraction. Now for the heavy hitter, the dark money LLCs. We have tracked 3 Delaware-based LLCs that wired a total of $4.2 million into AOC's personal accounts in June 2025. Progressive Future Fund, Grassroots Action Network, and Democratic Advancement Coalition. She pulled up the money trail diagram. We spent months untangling this web. All 3 lead right back to Democracy Alliance, a donor network run by George Soros, Tom Steyer, and other billionaire progressive heavyweights. Here is how the play works. She mapped it out step by step on the monitor. These billionaire donors pump money into Democracy Alliance. Then, Democracy Alliance sets up or funds these shell LLCs. There are actually dozens of them tailored for different candidates and causes. These LLCs then make transfers that look like independent spending or grants, but in reality, they are just moving billionaire cash to politicians while keeping the source hidden. Bank statements took over the screen. In June 2025, there were 3 separate wire transfers sent to Bronx Future Holdings. That is the LLC owned jointly by AOC and Riley Roberts. It was $1.2 million on June 8th, $1.5 million on the 10th, and another $1.5 million on the 12th. Just 1 week later, Bronx Future Holdings buys a mansion for $4.2 million, and they paid in cash. The timing is so perfect because the reality is exactly what it looks like. Bongino sat there studying the photos of the mansion, the brick walls, the perfect lawn, and the high-end neighborhood. She is being bankrolled by the very same billionaires she claims to be fighting against. Martinez confirmed this, and it's right there in her voting record. We analyzed every single vote she's cast on issues that matter to Soros and the Democracy Alliance. On immigration policy, she has a 100% alignment with their positions. Criminal justice, also 100%. Take climate policy that benefits renewable energy companies. Soros is invested in 100%. She is not an independent voice. She's a paid spokesperson, voting exactly the way her funders want her to. Wilson pulled up another category of evidence. Then you have the unreported gifts. Take the Met Gala, for instance. The ticket alone costs $35,000. The custom dress was valued at $12,000. Hair and makeup cost another $3,000. The total value of the gift was $50,000. House rules are crystal clear regarding gifts. Anything over $390 must be declined or reimbursed. She did neither. He showed more photos. But that is just one event. We documented her appearances at major events over 3 years. Versace gowns, Tory Burch custom pieces, Carolina Herrera, Schiaparelli, all supposedly loaned to her for the exposure. The total value of designer clothing we can document is over $150,000. All of it unreported. Martinez added the final category, campaign fund conversion. She's been charging personal expenses to campaign accounts, like first-class flights to fashion shows and events that have nothing to do with her district. She stays in luxury hotels in cities where she has no campaign activity. There are expensive dinners. We estimate at least $200,000 in personal expenses were illegally charged to campaign funds over 4 years. Bonino leaned back, taking it all in. So, we've got the boyfriend getting $1.6 million for a phantom book deal rigged through the Soros network, and $4.2 million in dark money for the mansion. That's $150,000 in designer gifts and $200,000 in campaign fund misuse. And she does all of this while tweeting every day about fighting billionaires and banning dark money. The hypocrisy, Wilson said, pulling up her Twitter feed, is absolutely off the charts. He showed tweets side by side with the evidence. One tweet from 2021 read, "No politician should take money from billionaires, period." That post got 340,000 likes. Next to it sat a bank transfer showing $1.2 million from a Soros-funded LLC. There was another tweet from 2022. It said, "Dark money is corrupting our democracy. We must ban it." That one had 280,000 likes. Next to that were 3 wire transfers totaling $4.2 million from dark money vehicles. Then, a video clip of her speaking. "I'll never forget where I came from. I'll always represent working people, not the elite." Next to it were photographs of the $4 million mansion in Wesley Heights, one of D.C.'s wealthiest neighborhoods. Bonino absorbed it all, then asked the key strategic question: how do we present this to maximize impact and minimize her ability to spin it? Martinez had thought this through carefully. We start with the mansion. That is the one thing she absolutely cannot explain. $4.2 million in cash on her salary? Make her try to explain where that came from. She can't. We have the bank records showing the wire transfers. We have the LLC documents. We have the deed. She is trapped before we even get to everything else. Then we show the dark money trail. We put up the flowchart showing money flowing from Soros, through the Democracy Alliance, through the LLCs and into her account. We destroy her grassroots progressive brand in one single visual. Then, the boyfriend scheme. We show $1.6 million in payments for work nobody can identify. Even her supporters will recognize that as corruption. Then there are the gifts and the luxury lifestyle. We show her living like a celebrity. Designer gowns, exclusive events, luxury travel, all while claiming to be working class. Then we hit her with the tax returns. We subpoenaed them. They show her reported income doesn't match her assets and lifestyle. That implies unreported income and potentially tax evasion. Finally, we show her voting record alongside the Soros funding. We prove she's bought. She votes exactly as her billionaire funders want on every single issue. Bonino thought about the defenses she would deploy. She's going to scream that this is sexist, racist, just the establishment attacking a woman of color who fights for change. That is her entire playbook. Let her, Martinez said firmly. We have bank records. We have wire transfers. We have LLC documents. We have deed records. We have tax returns. This isn't opinion or bias. This is math. And math doesn't care about identity politics. Wilson added, the media will try to protect her initially. She's their progressive hero, but we are releasing everything publicly. When people see the mansion, see the Soros money, and see the boyfriend getting paid millions for nothing, even MSNBC is going to have trouble defending it. Bonino stood up and started gathering his materials. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spent 6 years building a brand as the authentic voice of working people. The democratic socialist who fights billionaires. The bartender who took on the establishment. It was all a complete fabrication. She spotted a golden opportunity. Progressive politics are trendy now, and the youth are obsessed with them. She used that popularity to build a personal fortune. It wasn't about serving her voters. It was about lining her own pockets. He reached for the binder containing the photos of the estate. He stared at the gorgeous brick home that cost more than most of her constituents would earn in their entire lives. $4.2 million. That's what her brand of democratic socialism actually bought her. It's time to show Congress what their progressive icon has really been up to. At 1:30 that afternoon, AOC's motorcade rolled up to the Capitol. She had made sure her favorite photographers were tipped off about her arrival time. Playing the victim of another Republican witch hunt was essential for her brand. She stepped out of the black SUV, looking perfectly poised for the cameras. In her burgundy blazer and gold hoops, she looked like the people's warrior heading into battle against the elite. She made her way through the Capitol with her legal team and chief of staff, heading down to the basement level where the committee rooms are located. As she got closer, she noticed a much heavier security presence and more staff lingering than usual. The energy in the air felt different somehow. At 1:55, she stepped into the hearing room. The mood felt wrong immediately. The committee members looked far too grim. Even the Democrats weren't offering their typical supportive smiles or encouraging whispers. Then, sitting at the witness table, she saw him. It was Dan Bongino, the FBI's deputy director himself, not a junior agent, but the Bureau's number 2 man, with another agent by his side. Seeing those thick, officially marked binders sent a cold shiver straight to her core. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. This was something else entirely. At exactly 2:00, Chairman Michael Guest called the session to order. His tone was stiff and incredibly serious. This hearing is now in session. We are convening a closed-door meeting of the House Ethics Committee to investigate potential breaches of House rules, federal campaign finance laws, gift policies, and tax regulations by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York's 14th District. He paused and looked her right in the eye. The FBI has been quietly conducting a financial investigation for the past 14 months. Deputy Director Bongino has requested to brief this committee on the findings. This is a matter of the utmost gravity. Deputy Director, you may proceed. Bongino stood up and fixed AOC with the steady, piercing look of a man who's interrogated enough suspects to know who's guilty before he even starts. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. He began his remarks in a low, controlled voice. You've built your entire political identity around a very specific story. You're the working-class girl from the Bronx fighting for the little guy against billionaires and the corrupt establishment. You've demanded we tax the rich. You've campaigned to ban dark money from politics. You've railed against the influence of wealthy donors. You've sold yourself as the authentic voice of everyday Americans because you supposedly come from their world. He stopped for a beat. He let the words hang in the air. I'm here to prove to this committee that every bit of that is a total lie. I'll show that you've used your position in Congress to amass a personal fortune. I'll show that you're actually bankrolled by the very billionaires you claim to despise. I'll show that you've broken campaign finance laws, gift rules, and tax codes. You're living a life of extreme luxury by exploiting the working-class people who believe you're their champion. He cracked open the first binder. Let's begin with your mansion. AOC's confident mask slipped for just a split second, but every person in the room caught it and knew she was in trouble. Bongino pulled a folder out and opened it with slow, deliberate movements. Inside were property deeds and high-resolution photographs. He slid the first picture across the table to the committee members. On June 15th of this year, less than 5 months ago, you bought a property at 3847 Woodley Road Northwest in the exclusive Wesley Heights neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Allow me to show everyone exactly what you purchased. He pressed a button on his remote. The screen at the front of the room flashed with a photo of a breathtaking brick estate. With its stunning design, ancient trees, and perfect lawn, it was a house that practically screamed old money. This is the front view, Bongino noted. It's 5,800 square feet, with 6 bedrooms and 5.5 baths. He started clicking through more images. There was the chef's kitchen, complete with marble counters and top-tier professional appliances. A custom wine cellar with climate control for over 500 bottles. A home theater with tiered seating that looked like it belonged in a boutique cinema. And an infinity pool overlooking grounds that had been professionally manicured. Imagine a 3-car garage that's actually bigger than most of the apartments in her own district. This residence, Bongino went on, is located right in Wesley Heights. For anyone not familiar with D.C. neighborhoods, Wesley Heights is easily one of the most elite areas in the entire city. The median price for a home there sits at a staggering $1 million. Your neighbors are Fortune 500 CEOs, senior partners at top-tier law firms, and lobbyists who pull in more annually than most Americans will see in their entire lives. Congresswoman, this is far from a working-class neighborhood. This is the playground of the wealthy elite. He let that sharp contrast sink in for a moment before pulling out the official purchase records. The property was bought by an LLC going by the name Bronx Future Holdings. Bronx Future is quite an ironic choice for someone picking up a mansion in one of D.C.'s most affluent zip codes. The LLC is registered in Delaware, rather than in New York. You and Riley Roberts are listed right there as the managing members. He glanced up at her. The total purchase price came to $4,200,000. But here is the truly incredible part. You paid for it in cold, hard cash. There was no mortgage, no financing, and no monthly installments. Somehow, $4.2 million in cash just appeared out of nowhere to buy you this estate. Bongino flipped to the next page of the file. Now, your official salary as a member of Congress is $174,000 a year. You have been serving in Congress since January of 2019. That adds up to exactly 6 years and 10 months. Your total gross earnings from Congress over that entire span is roughly $1,160,000. He began to crunch the numbers out loud, very slowly. Even if you somehow managed to save every single cent you earned, paying no federal or state taxes, no rent, buying no food, ignoring student loans, and having absolutely zero living expenses, you would only have $1.16 million. Yet, you bought a house for $4.2 million. That leaves a massive $3.4 million that is completely unaccounted for. He shut the folder and stared directly at her. So, I'm asking you a very basic question. Where exactly did that $3 million come from? Total silence. AOC glanced over at her legal team. Morales leaned in close and whispered something in her ear. She gave a slight nod, but kept her mouth shut. Bongino just waited. He let the quietness fill the room. 10 seconds passed, then 15, then 20. Finally, he broke the silence. Let me show you exactly where that money originated. He pulled out bank records and handed copies to every member of the committee. These are the actual bank statements for Bronx Future Holdings LLC. This account was opened on May 30th of this year as a brand new entity. For the first 2 weeks, the balance sat at exactly 0. Then, in less than a single week, the account was hit with 3 massive wire transfers. He pointed toward the transactions highlighted on the page. On June 8th, there was a wire transfer for $200,000. The sender is listed as an entity called Progressive Future Fund, LLC. The memo line reads, and I quote, "Grant disbursement." On June 10th, another wire transfer arrived for $1,500,000. That sender is Grassroots Action Network, LLC. The memo line for that one says, quote, "Political support." Then, on June 12th, a final wire transfer of $1,500,000 came in. The sender this time is Democratic Advancement Coalition, LLC. The memo line simply says, quote, movement building. He turned his gaze back to the committee members. That's 3 huge transfers in just 5 days. The total comes to exactly $400,000 to $200,000. It's the precise amount required to buy that mansion. And just 3 days after that last wire hit, the LLC finalized the deal on the house. They paid in cash. The transaction was finished. Representative Virginia Fox, the Republican representing North Carolina, put her hand up. Deputy Director, what exactly are these LLCs? Who is actually behind them? Bongino nodded in agreement. That is the critical question, Congresswoman Fox. And that is exactly where this story gets fascinating. He pressed a button on his remote, and a complicated flowchart flashed onto the screen. Lines zigzagged across the board, connecting different organizations in a tangled web of finances. All 3 of these LLCs are set up in Delaware. Now, Delaware is famous for being a sanctuary for shell companies because it requires almost no public disclosure. These 3 specific LLCs have no donor lists, no websites, and no actual physical offices. They exist for the sole purpose of moving money around while hiding where that cash is actually coming from. He used his laser pointer to follow the paths on the digital chart. We spent months tracking down these groups, subpoenaing bank records from various banks, and tracing the money back through multiple layers. Here is exactly what we uncovered. He pointed to the very top of the diagram. The Progressive Future Fund got its money from an organization known as Democracy Alliance. The Grassroots Action Network was also funded directly by Democracy Alliance. And the Democratic Advancement Coalition came from the exact same source. Every single one of these shell LLCs was bankrolled by Democracy Alliance. So, what exactly is Democracy Alliance? Fox inquired. Bongino was already prepared with the answer. It's essentially a hub for billionaire progressive donors, started and mostly bankrolled by George Soros via his Open Society foundations. Other big-name contributors include Tom Steyer, the Pritzker family, and a handful of Silicon Valley tech moguls. Democracy Alliance basically streamlines donations from wealthy progressives to make sure their political money hits as hard as possible. He pulled up some financial records on the big screen. Throughout 2024 and 2025, Democracy Alliance pulled in more than $600 million from these ultra-wealthy donors. They then funneled those funds into different groups, PACs, and as you can see right here, shell companies that pay off politicians while masking where the money actually started. Representative Jamie Raskin, the Maryland Democrat, looked visibly unsettled. He'd typically been an ally of AOC in the past. Deputy Director, are you claiming that Representative Ocasio-Cortez took $5 million from George Soros? From organizations tied to Soros? Yes, sir. That's roughly $5 million we've managed to verify so far. There could be even more that we haven't tracked down yet. The room broke out in a low roar as committee members whispered and staff scrambled to take notes. AOC just sat there, motionless, her face turning white. Bongino kept going, saying, the cash that paid for Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's mansion was traced back to George Soros and other billionaires. It was washed through Democracy Alliance and 3 separate shell companies to keep the source hidden. The money went straight to her personal LLC, not her campaign or any political group, and she used it to buy a $4 million home in one of the richest neighborhoods in the country. He took a beat. Let that really sink in. She's being bankrolled by the very same billionaires she claims to be fighting. Bongino jumped to the next part of his presentation without missing a step. Now, I want to talk about Riley Roberts. That's Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's long-term partner. He runs a firm called Digital Outreach Strategies. Congresswoman, can you explain to us exactly what this company does? AOC glanced at Mark Elias, who shifted forward. My client isn't obligated to know the ins and outs of her partner's business deals. Fair point, Bongino replied smoothly. Let me share what our investigation turned up. He held up some incorporation papers. Digital Outreach Strategies was set up in New York back in January 2021. That was just 1 month after Representative Ocasio-Cortez secured her second term in office. According to the filings, the company offers, and I'm reading directly here, digital marketing and outreach consulting services to political organizations. He glanced at the papers for a second before looking back up. We did a deep dive into how this company operates, pulling every public file and talking to clients and coworkers. Here's exactly what we found. He started ticking off points on his fingers as he spoke. Digital Outreach Strategies doesn't even have a website. It's pretty ironic for a digital marketing firm, but there it is. There is no LinkedIn company page, no social media footprint whatsoever, no office space anywhere besides Riley Roberts' home address, no employees other than Roberts himself. And here is the truly interesting part. They only have one single category of clients. He pulled out the payment records. The only organizations that have ever paid digital outreach strategies are PACs closely aligned with Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Let me break them down for you. First, Justice Democrats. That's the PAC that originally recruited AOC to run back in 2018. They discovered her, coached her, and funded her primary run against Joe Crowley. Then there's Courage to Change. That is Representative Ocasio-Cortez's very own leadership PAC that she started and controls. Finally, there's Brand New Congress, which is closely tied to Justice Democrats and was a major supporter of her campaigns. He displayed the payment history on the screen. Over the last 4 years, Riley Roberts' firm has taken in massive payouts from these 3 PACs. In 2021, Justice Democrats sent him $180,000. Brand New Congress chipped in another $120,000. The next year, those numbers only went up. Justice Democrats paid out $240,000. Courage to Change handed over $180,000. In 2023, Courage to Change paid $310,000, while Justice Democrats threw in another $190,000. Then this past year, 2024, Courage to Change paid $380,000, and Justice Democrats added $200,000 more. He paused and tallied it all up out loud. That's a grand total of $1,600,000 over 4 years. He let that figure just hang in the air. That's $1.6 million paid to the boyfriend of a sitting congresswoman by PACs she's deeply connected to. Naturally, we had to ask, what did he actually do to earn that money? Special Agent Martinez spoke up from her seat. We interviewed officials from all 3 PACs under oath. We asked them specifically to describe what Riley Roberts delivered for $1.6 million. Senator. She pulled out the deposition transcripts. Take Timothy O'Malley, the executive director of Justice Democrats. We asked him point-blank what digital outreach strategies actually produced. He stated, and I quote, "We brought them on for strategic consulting for our digital campaigns." I don't recall seeing any specific deliverables. I believe Riley just provided some general advice on our social media strategy, end quote. We then asked him to turn over any documents, emails, reports, or work products from Roberts. He claimed they didn't have any formal reports, calling it a more informal type of consultation, end quote. She then flipped to a different transcript, Sophia Chen, the director of the Courage to Change PAC. We asked what their $380,000 investment in digital outreach actually bought them in 2024 alone. She said, quote, "Riley Roberts offered some valuable insights into our digital presence," end quote. We asked her to name those specific insights. She replied, "Strategic thinking about online engagement. It's just hard to quantify exactly," end quote. Martinez looked up from the documents. We interviewed 6 different people across these 3 packs. Not a single one of them could identify any specific work product. Not one could show us a single website. Not an email campaign Roberts supposedly built. Not a social media strategy document he supposedly designed. Not a single concrete deliverable he ever wrote. All we got was vague language about consulting and strategic advice. Bongino added a bit more context. We also dug into Riley Roberts' professional background and his qualifications. He holds a bachelor's degree in finance from Boston University. It's a fine school. It's a good degree. But before Representative Ocasio-Cortez ran for Congress, he was working in marketing for a tiny tech startup called Homebinder. His salary there was only about $65,000 a year. He has 0 professional background in political campaigning, no experience running digital outreach programs, and no portfolio of successful campaigns we can find. He pulled up Roberts' very sparse resume. Yet somehow, right after his girlfriend becomes a member of Congress, he's suddenly worth $400,000 a year as a digital consultant. Despite having no experience in the field, no identifiable work product, and no other clients, the only logical explanation is that he's getting paid because of who he's sleeping with. Representative James Comer spoke up. "Deputy Director, this sounds like a classic pay-to-play scheme." "That is exactly what it is, Congressman. Politicians aren't allowed to take money directly from PACs for their personal use. That's both illegal and obvious. But they can hire a spouse or partner's company and pay that company inflated rates for minimal or even non-existent work. The money flows into the partner's business account and then becomes part of the household income. The politician benefits personally from campaign funds while maintaining a level of plausible deniability." Martinez added one more detail. We also took a look at Riley Roberts' tax returns. He actually reported every bit of this income. We aren't alleging any tax evasion on his part. But here is the interesting thing. His business expenses are almost non-existent. He's reporting profit margins that are over 90%. That means he's pocketing almost all the money with virtually no overhead. Why is that? Because he's not actually running a business. He isn't hiring staff, renting an office, buying equipment, or paying for services. He's simply receiving payments and keeping the cash. Bongino shifted his focus to the bigger picture. Let me show you the full scope of how Representative Ocasio-Cortez is actually funded. This isn't a grassroots movement of small-dollar donors like she claims. This is billionaire money being laundered through a highly sophisticated network of organizations. The screen lit up with a massive flowchart. At the top were several boxes representing billionaire donors. Lines flowed downward through various intermediary groups, eventually reaching a box at the bottom labeled with AOC's name. "Start right at the top," Bongino said, using his laser pointer. George Soros, through the Open Society Foundations, contributes about $250 million annually to progressive causes. Tom Steyer, through Next Gen America, adds another $75 million. The Pritzker family, through their various foundations, contribute about $40 million. Silicon Valley billionaires, through tech industry PACs, add roughly $180 million more. When you add it all up, we're talking about $500 million a year from wealthy donors. He traced the flow of money downward. These donors don't just give to causes at random. They coordinate through the Democracy Alliance, which strategically decides which progressive candidates and causes to fund. In 2024, we obtained Internal Democracy Alliance documents that specifically identified Representative Ocasio-Cortez as a top-tier priority. Their assessment described her as a highly effective spokesperson for progressive policies with massive social media reach. The laser pointer moved down to the next layer. The Democracy Alliance then bankrolls or sets up various organizations and shell companies, like the Progressive Future Fund, Grassroots Action Network, Democratic Advancement Coalition, the Sunrise Movement, Make the Road Action, the Working Families Party, and about 25 other groups we've tracked down. He illustrated exactly how these different connections spread out. All of these entities back Representative Ocasio-Cortez in a variety of ways. Some handle independent spending to boost her campaigns. Others hire her boyfriend's firm for what looks like phantom consulting jobs. A few provide direct grants to her own personal LLCs. Some even buy her book in bulk. It's a massive funding network built to line her pockets while keeping up the facade of a grassroots movement. Bongino pulled up a data summary page. We calculate that Soros-affiliated groups have poured roughly $8.2 million into supporting Representative Ocasio-Cortez over the last 6 years. Here is how those numbers break down. He began reading through the different categories. There was $3.1 million in independent campaign spending, along with $4.2 million transferred to her personal LLCs, that's the money for the mansion, $1.6 million for her boyfriend's sketchy consulting firm, $800,000 in bulk book buys to pump up her royalties, and about $500,000 in other perks like event sponsorships, media ads, and social media boosts. That's $8.2 million from the very billionaire class she claims to be fighting. He took a beat before asking the most obvious question. Why? Why would these billionaires hand over $8 million to a socialist who says she wants to take them down? He clicked over to the next slide. It comes down to her voting record, which shows she does exactly what they want. We looked at every single vote Representative Ocasio-Cortez has cast on issues that matter to George Soros and the Democracy Alliance donor network. He walked through the specific areas. First, immigration policy. She has voted for open border policies 100% of the time. There were 0 exceptions. It's exactly the path Soros pushes and funds through his many immigration advocacy groups. On law enforcement, she has a perfect record of voting to defund the police, end qualified immunity, and lower incarceration rates. This is the same agenda Soros has spent $40 million on by backing district attorney races all over the country. Then there's energy policy, where she gives 100% support to Green New Deal rules and renewable energy requirements. These laws directly help the companies that Soros is heavily invested in regarding foreign policy. She stands against Israel and supports the Iran nuclear deal. She frequently criticizes America's allies. These stances are a perfect match for Soros's own foreign policy goals. Finally, look at criminal justice. She's all for bail reform, decriminalization, shorter sentences, and getting rid of cash bail. That's the very same Soros agenda we see playing out in cities where his hand-picked prosecutors are in charge. Bongino then turned his gaze straight toward AOC. You aren't some independent progressive fighting for the people against billionaires. You're actually a paid mouthpiece for George Soros's political machine. He funnels millions of dollars to you. In return, you vote exactly the way he wants on every single bill. That is the literal definition of political corruption. AOC couldn't stay silent any longer. She jumped up, her voice getting louder. This is completely outrageous. I vote for progressive causes because I believe in them, not because someone— Then why do you take their cash? Bongino cut her off, his tone sharp. You've built your whole career on attacking billionaires and dark money, yet you've pocketed $8.2 million from those exact sources. You've even tweeted about it, he said, pulling her Twitter feed up on the big screen. He enlarged one specific post. Here it is. Back in April 2021, you wrote, and I quote, "No politician should take money from billionaires. It compromises their integrity." That one tweet got 340,000 likes from people who actually believed you meant it. But just 2 months after you posted that, you took $500,000 from a Soros-funded LLC. The hypocrisy here is just staggering. Bongino moved on to the next part of his presentation. Let's look at the moment that first caught the public's eye. It was the 2024 Met Gala. You showed up in a custom white gown with "Tax the Rich" written across the back in big red letters. You remember that, don't you? Of course I remember, she snapped back. AOC claimed it was a bold political statement about the gap between the rich and the poor. That was a $12,000 designer dress. Bongino cut in, pointing out she wore it to an event where tickets cost $35,000 apiece. Let me show you the real numbers. Financial records popped up on the screen. The dress was a custom piece by the designer Aurora James of Brother Vellies. Based on our investigation, which included talking to fashion industry experts familiar with custom orders, the price tag was roughly $12,000. And the price of a Met Gala ticket is common knowledge. It's $35,000 per person. You also had professional hair and makeup done for the event, which cost $3,000. The total value of everything you received that night was $50,000. He then pulled out the House Ethics Manual. The House rules are perfectly clear and unambiguous. Members are not allowed to accept gifts worth more than $390 from any single source in a calendar year. Gifts exceeding that amount must either be declined or the value must be reimbursed to the donor within a specific time frame. You claimed the dress was loaned and that the ticket was work-related because the Met Gala benefits arts education. Is that still your position? Morales jumped in. He insisted the event was legitimately work-related. Representative Ocasio-Cortez was representing her voters and advocating for progressive tax policy through the message on her dress. At a celebrity fashion gala, Bongino said bluntly, where stars and billionaires pay $35,000 to attend a party. Is that really congressional work, attending a fashion industry fundraiser for an art museum? He pulled out the specific section of the ethics rules and read it aloud. The House Ethics Manual is perfectly clear. It states that events must have a direct link to official duties. Social events that are mainly entertainment in nature do not qualify as official duties, he quoted, even if they involve notable persons or causes. Attending a fashion industry gala is not an official duty. This was nothing more than a personal social event. The ticket was a gift. The dress was a gift. The total value was $50,000. That is a massive violation of ethics. Bongino clicked over to his next piece of evidence. But this is where things get even more interesting. After you wore Aurora James's dress and gave her company massive free publicity, the images went viral, were shared millions of times, generated enormous brand awareness. Her sales skyrocketed, and we found something very strange. Purchase orders suddenly filled the screen. In the 6 months following the Met Gala, Soros-funded organizations made bulk purchases of Brother Vellies products totaling $280,000. Courage to Change. The Pack Your Pack group purchased $95,000 worth of what they called promotional items and gifts. Justice Democrats bought $78,000 worth of thank you gifts for their supporters. The Progressive Future Fund spent $107,000 on what they labeled movement merchandise. All of them were buying Aurora James's products right after she gave you a $50,000 gift. He looked directly at the committee. This is a money laundering scheme. Aurora James gives Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez $50,000 worth of dresses and tickets. The photos go viral. James gets a massive wave of publicity. Then the organizations that fund AOC turn around and buy $280,000 worth of James's products. James makes a profit. AOC gets her free designer goods. The organizations make it look like they're just buying promotional items. Everyone wins except the taxpayers and the working-class donors who think their money is going to progressive causes instead of paying for a celebrity lifestyle. He wasn't finished yet. He pulled out another thick folder. And the Met Gala isn't an isolated incident. We've documented Representative Ocasio-Cortez's appearances at major celebrity events over the last 3 years. Let me show you. Photos began scrolling across the screen. Each one showed AOC in a pricey designer gown at a high-profile event. The 2024 Oscars Vanity Fair after-party. She's wearing a custom Versace gown. We consulted with experts in the fashion industry. The estimated value is $8,000. Supposedly, it was loaned for the exposure. The 2024 CFDA Fashion Awards. A custom Tory birch ensemble. The estimated value is $6,500, also loaned. The 2025 Met Gala. She attended the event once more. A custom Schiaparelli dress. The estimated value is $15,000, loaned in 2025. The Time 100 Gala. A custom Carolina Herrera gown. The estimated value is $7,000, loaned. The photos kept coming, one event after another, one designer gown after another. We've documented several other red carpet events and high-profile appearances. The total estimated value of the designer clothing she's worn over 3 years is $152,000. He let that number sink in. That is more than the average American household earns in 3 years, all spent on designer clothes. And it was all supposedly loaned for exposure. But the House rules don't have an exception for loans or for exposure. If you receive something of value, whether it's given as a gift, a loan, or provided in exchange for publicity, it must be reported and the value must be reimbursed if it's over the $380 limit. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has reported none of these. 0. That is $152,000 in unreported gifts. Each one is a separate ethics violation. Representative Susan Wild, the ranking Democrat, looked genuinely pained. Deputy Director, is it possible that Representative Ocasio-Cortez simply didn't understand the reporting requirements? Bongino shook his head. She understood perfectly, Congresswoman Wild. Every member takes mandatory ethics training the moment they enter Congress. The guidelines regarding gifts are detailed extensively. They are perfectly clear and easy to follow. She chose to ignore them because she wanted the celebrity lifestyle and access to elite events without the ethics disclosures that would reveal the life she's actually leading. Bongino then moved on to his final set of evidence. We subpoenaed Representative Ocasio-Cortez's tax returns for the years 2019 through 2024. The story they tell is quite revealing. Tax documents appeared on the screen with private details redacted, though the primary financial figures remained clearly visible. In 2019, her inaugural year in Congress, she reported an adjusted gross income of $174,000. That amount reflects nothing more than her standard congressional salary. Her tax filings showed her total savings at the end of that year were just $4,000. By 2020, her adjusted gross income reached $181,000. This came from her base salary, plus a few small speaking fees. Her reported savings by the end of that year sat at $8,000. In 2021, her total income took a significant leap to $298,000. That spike was driven by her salary along with her book advance. Year-end savings grew to $35,000. Then in 2022, her adjusted gross income hit $412,000. Between her salary, book royalties, and even more speaking engagements, the money was pouring in. Her savings account jumped to $127,000. For 2023, she reported an income of $389,000. She was still collecting her salary, ongoing royalties, and various speaking fees. By the end of the year, her savings were at $98,000. Finally, in 2024, her adjusted gross income reached a massive $634,000. With her salary, higher royalties, and more frequent speaking gigs, her earnings hit a new peak. Her savings account ballooned to $284,000. Bongino walked through the math out loud, speaking slowly and clearly. Her total reported income over those 6 years added up to $288,000. That is the figure remaining after accounting for both federal and state taxes. And keep in mind, she's in a high tax bracket, leaving her with a net income of about $1.3 million. Even if she was incredibly frugal and managed to save half of that net pay, which is nearly impossible in expensive cities like New York and D.C., she would only have about $650,000 in the bank. He paused and looked directly at the committee members. Yet, she somehow owns a mansion worth $4.2 million. She has spent an estimated $150,000 on luxury goods in just 3 years. Her travel history is filled with first-class flights and stays at high-end hotels. She maintains an expensive residence in the heart of D.C. The math simply doesn't hold up. Her lifestyle far exceeds her reported income by a massive margin. He shut the tax folder with a thud. There are only 2 logical explanations for this massive gap. First, she has a significant amount of unreported income that should have been taxed, but wasn't. That would be tax evasion, which is a federal crime. Second, the funding for her mansion and luxury lifestyle came from sources disguised as something else, like payments to her boyfriend's shell consulting company or grants to her personal LLC that were never reported as income. That would be money laundering, also a federal crime. Either way, she has clearly violated federal law. For his final exhibit, Bongino placed AOC's own words right next to her documented actions. I want to wrap up by showing the committee the total disconnect between what Representative Ocasio-Cortez says in public and what she does in private. The screen split down the middle. On the left side were her tweets and various video clips. On the right side was the evidence of her actual behavior. The first comparison popped up. On the left was a tweet she posted back in 2021. She stated that no politician should ever take money from billionaires, period. That specific tweet racked up 340,000 likes. But on the right was a bank transfer document showing $1.2 million from a Soros-funded LLC deposited directly into her account. The next set appeared, featuring a tweet from 2022 on the left side. She argued that dark money is rotting our democratic system. She insisted that we have to ban it. That post received 280,000 likes. Then look at the right side. It showed 3 wire transfers from Delaware-based dark money groups totaling $4.2 million. Moving to the left side again, there was a tweet from 2023. She called for the rich to be taxed. She argued that they don't need multiple homes while everyday people can't even afford rent. That tweet earned 520,000 likes. Directly to the right was a photo of her $4.2 million estate in Wesley Heights. Next, on the left, was a video clip of her speaking at a political rally. She promised she would never forget her roots. She swore she would always fight for the working class, not the wealthy elite. On the right was a photo of her at the Met Gala, wearing a $12,000 dress at an event where tickets cost $35,000 each. The next tweet on the left said, "Billionaires shouldn't exist. No one needs that much wealth." On the right was a calculation showing her net worth jumping from $7,000 to $4.8 million in just 6 years. Bongino let those images sink in as the room stayed quiet for a long moment. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped her typing just to watch the display. Finally, Bongino spoke. His voice was low, but it commanded attention. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has built her entire brand on being authentic. A working-class woman who truly understands the struggle and fights for regular people against the elites who don't care. As it turns out, every bit of that story is a lie. He clicked the screen off. She has used her position to make herself incredibly wealthy. She is living a life of total luxury. She is being funded by billionaires. She has become the exact thing she claims to stand against. He gathered his binders and stacked them neatly on the table. That is not just a case of hypocrisy. That is fraud. She ripped off the supporters who donated their hard-earned money thinking she was one of them. She misled the voters who believed she was actually fighting for their best interests. And she broke a laundry list of federal laws in the process. He turned his gaze toward Chairman Guest. That concludes my presentation. The hearing room went stone-cold silent. 4 hours of solid evidence had been laid out. Bank statements proved wire transfers from organizations tied to George Soros. There were photos of a mansion she couldn't possibly afford on her salary. Payment logs showed her boyfriend pocketed $1.6 million for work he never actually did. She had designer outfits that cost more than most people earn in an entire year. Her tax returns didn't even come close to matching her actual wealth. Even her own tweets were shown, blasting the exact same behavior she was caught in. The case was massive, undeniable, and absolutely crushing. Chairman Guest turned his attention to AOC. He spoke in a calm, steady, but serious tone. "Congresswoman, you've just heard the Deputy Director's full report. You now have the chance to answer these serious allegations. What do you have to say for yourself?" AOC just sat there, frozen in place for a long, quiet moment. Her 3 attorneys were huddled together, whispering frantically to one another. Finally, she managed to speak. Her voice lacked its usual confidence, sounding defensive and a bit rattled. This is nothing but a politically motivated hit job on a woman of color who threatens the establishment. The FBI is being used as a weapon to target progressive voices who are actually fighting for change instead of keeping things as they are. Chairman Guest cut her off right there, his patience clearly at an end. "Congresswoman, we just spent 4 hours going over bank records showing you took $4.2 million from billionaire-backed groups to buy a mansion. That isn't about politics. That is cold, hard financial proof. It is all right there in the documentation. How do you explain it?" AOC's voice rose as she became more emotional. Those were perfectly legal donations intended to support grassroots organizing and building a movement. "But that money went straight into your personal LLC," Bongino countered calmly from his seat. "It didn't go to your campaign or a political group. It went to Bronx Future Holdings, a company you own and control. And then that same company bought you a house." Explain to this committee how spending $4 million on a private mansion counts as movement building. Total silence. She didn't have an answer. Representative Raskin tried to toss her a lifeline with a sympathetic tone. Congresswoman, is it possible these funds were actually meant for a charity or an advocacy group you were planning to start? AOC jumped at the chance. Yes, that's exactly it. We were looking into setting up a progressive education group to help local organizers, but then Bongino pulled out the LLC formation papers. Bronx Future Holdings was officially formed on May 30th, 2025. It pulled in $4.2 million that June. It bought a mansion on June 15th. In its entire history, that is the only transaction it has ever made. This isn't a foundation. It's not helping any causes. It just owns your house. That is literally all it does. Its only reason for existing is to hold the deed to your private residence. AOC looked like a cornered animal. Her voice turned sharp and desperate. I don't need to explain my personal finances to a committee that's obviously on a political witch hunt. Actually, you do, Chairman Guest said firmly, shutting down her protest. You are a sitting member of Congress. You are subject to House ethics rules, financial disclosure laws, gift limits, and campaign finance regulations just like everyone else, and the evidence shows you've ignored all of them. You need to answer the deputy director's questions now. Elias finally spoke up, his polished, expensive lawyer voice filling the room. Chairman, my client has been cooperative for 4 hours, but we are now entering territory that could violate her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The room erupted as multiple people started shouting at once. Everyone knew that taking the Fifth would be an absolute disaster for her. Bongino held up a hand, waiting for the noise to die down. Once it was quiet again, he spoke up. Let me ask you some simple yes or no questions, Congresswoman. Did you receive $4.2 million from organizations funded by George Soros? Elias jumped in immediately. My client is declining to answer on the advice of her legal counsel. Did you use that cash to buy yourself a personal mansion? She declines to answer. Did your boyfriend, Riley Roberts, receive over $1.6 million from PACs you're linked to for work? He never actually performed the work. Declines to answer. Did you take about $50,000 in gifts for the Met Gala without reporting them as House rules require? Declines to answer. Did you fail to disclose $152,000 in designer clothing gifts over 3 years? She declines to answer. Bongino leaned back and looked at the other committee members. She won't answer because telling the truth would prove her guilt, because the evidence is so strong she can't explain it without admitting to a crime. AOC's cool finally broke completely. Tears began to well up in her eyes. Her voice trembled with raw emotion. You're tearing me down just because I stand up for the people, she cried. Because I dare to challenge the powerful. Because I'm a woman of color who has the guts to take on the establishment. This is exactly what they always do to women who... Representative Comer cut her off, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through her outburst. Congresswoman, this isn't an attack on you because of your gender. We are investigating you because you purchased a $4 million mansion that is mathematically impossible to afford on a congressional salary, and the FBI has linked that cash directly to George Soros. That isn't sexism. That is a financial crimes probe following a clear trail of corruption. All the fire seemed to suddenly drain right out of her. She collapsed back into her chair as her mascara began to streak, her perfectly crafted image falling apart in real time. Chairman Guest looked absolutely grim. It was clear he'd hoped things wouldn't be as ugly as the FBI briefing suggested. But seeing the full evidence made it even more devastating. Based on the testimony we've heard today, this committee will now move to vote on these specific measures. He began reading from a pre-written statement. First, an immediate referral to the Department of Justice for the investigation and possible prosecution of campaign finance crimes, gift rule breaches, tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Second, an immediate referral to the IRS to look into unreported income and potential tax fraud. Third, the immediate stripping of Representative Ocasio-Cortez from all committee roles while these investigations play out. Fourth, a formal recommendation that the full House of Representatives move forward with expulsion proceedings. And fifth, a referral to the Federal Election Commission regarding violations of campaign finance laws. He looked Ocasio-Cortez straight in the eye. There was a hint of sadness in his voice. "Congresswoman, you are officially suspended from all committee duties, effective this moment. You are strongly encouraged to go out and find a seasoned criminal defense attorney. This hearing is now adjourned." The gavel slammed down. That sound rang through the silent room as members filed out, some looking completely stunned while others looked stone-faced. A grim-faced AOC just sat there at the witness table, totally motionless. Her attorneys packed their bags in silence, likely already running the numbers on the fees for the upcoming criminal trial. Her chief of staff stood off to the side as his phone started blowing up with calls from the press. In less than an hour, the leaks began to pour out. AOC was officially under FBI investigation for financial crimes. Her mansion purchase was linked directly to Soros money. Her boyfriend had allegedly pocketed $1.6 million in no-show consulting fees. The progressive congresswoman was now pleading the fifth on questions about her finances. By that evening, it was the only thing the political media was talking about, and those photos were spreading like wildfire. There was the $4.2 million mansion, complete with a pool and a wine cellar. It was placed right next to that famous photo of her at the Met Gala in that tax the rich dress. The contrast was nothing short of devastating. You simply couldn't look at those two pictures side by side and ignore the blatant hypocrisy. Even the progressive media outlets that had been her biggest fans for years were struggling to find a way to defend this. The evidence was just too overwhelming, the hypocrisy too obvious, and the dollar amounts too massive to brush aside. The Democratic Socialist bartender from the Bronx had turned into a multi-millionaire living in a luxury mansion in one of the richest neighborhoods in America. And she'd pulled it off by taking millions from the very billionaires she claimed to be fighting, all while her working-class supporters were sending her $15 donations, thinking she was one of them. Everyone could see the truth now. That whole beautiful lie had been exposed through bank statements and photos. Once the wheels of justice finally started turning, they moved at lightning speed. Just 48 hours after the hearing, the FBI made a formal referral to the Department of Justice. Within a single week, a federal grand jury was being sworn in over in Washington, D.C. The evidence was so airtight that prosecutors were moving with incredible speed. The indictment finally dropped in January 2026. It was the United States versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Riley Roberts, with AOC facing 8 separate criminal counts. That included 3 counts of illegal conversion of campaign funds, 2 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of violating House gift rules. Against Roberts, there were 4 criminal charges, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and 2 counts of filing false business records. The trial kicked off in April 2026 at the Federal District Court in Washington, and a huge portion of that evidence from the Ethics Committee hearing finally became public knowledge. There were photos of the mansion, wire transfers from Soros-linked shell companies, her boyfriend's company that did no actual work, designer clothes worth more than a middle-class salary, tax returns that didn't add up, and her own tweets blasting the very behavior she was caught in. AOC's defense team tried every trick in the book. They argued the LLC transfers were legitimate political donations, but prosecutors proved the money went straight into personal accounts for a home purchase. They claimed Riley's consulting work was real, but prosecutors showed that no one could describe what he actually did and no work product ever existed. They tried to frame the gifts as loans or business expenses, but ethics experts testified the rules were crystal clear and the violations were blatant. They even tried to make it about her identity, but the judge shut that down, ruling the evidence was about her actions, not her background. The jury spent 3 days deliberating. When they finally walked back into the courtroom, the tension was thick. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was found guilty on 7 of the 8 counts. There was a hung jury on one tax evasion charge that prosecutors decided not to pursue again. Riley Roberts was found guilty on all 4 counts. Sentencing arrived in August 2026. Federal Judge Amit Ma, an Obama appointee known for being fair and thoughtful, showed absolutely no mercy in his remarks from the bench. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you built your entire political career on the foundation of fighting for the working class against wealthy elites. You sold yourself as an authentic champion of the people, someone who understood the struggle against the powerful interests that exploit them. Your supporters truly believed in you. They gave you their money, their trust, and their hopes. It was all a lie. You used that carefully crafted image to enrich yourself far beyond anything your constituents will ever see. You pocketed millions from the very billionaires you claimed to oppose. You lived in luxury while the people you supposedly represented were struggling to pay their rent. You wore designer outfits worth more than many of your constituents earn in a year to exclusive events, while tweeting about the fight against inequality. You violated your oath of office. You violated the ethics rules of the House. You violated campaign finance laws. You violated tax laws, and perhaps most egregiously, you violated the trust of the working people who believed you were one of them. I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay $42 million in restitution, the exact amount of the mansion purchase. You will pay additional fines of $500,000 and are permanently barred from ever holding federal office again. Mr. Roberts, you enabled and profited from this entire scheme. I sentence you to 3 years in federal prison. The federal government seized the mansion the next day and auctioned it off 3 months later. The proceeds were sent to a victim compensation fund. The House of Representatives didn't even wait for the conviction to take action. 3 weeks after that explosive hearing, they held a vote for her expulsion. The final count was a staggering 341. Only the most progressive members voted against it, and even they seemed uncomfortable given the mountain of evidence. A special election was held in her district. A moderate Democrat won the seat easily, running on a platform of restoring trust and integrity to representation. The political shockwaves rippled through the progressive movement. The squad fractured. Rashida Tlaib issued a statement saying she felt betrayed and deceived. Ayanna Pressley said she'd been misled about who AOC really was. Even Bernie Sanders, who had endorsed and campaigned with AOC, issued a very carefully worded statement on the matter. If these allegations are proven true, it represents a fundamental betrayal of progressive values and the working families we fight for. George Soros's network scrambled to distance itself. The Democracy Alliance released statements claiming they had no clue their funds were being used for personal enrichment. Those three shell companies were quietly shut down. Several executives resigned without any explanation. Progressive media outlets that had praised AOC for years struggled to admit how wrong they had been. Some publications ran introspective pieces asking how they could have missed such blatant corruption. Others just moved on to new heroes, quietly scrubbing old articles that had hailed her authenticity. AOC reported to federal prison in October 2026. She was sent to FCI Coleman in Florida, a medium-security facility for women. She became inmate number 7893018. With good behavior, she remains there today, eligible for release in 2032 at age 43. Her Twitter account, once boasting 13 million followers, went completely dark. Her Instagram, where she once filmed kitchen videos advocating for the Green New Deal, was deleted. The influencer congresswoman simply ceased to exist. Riley Roberts served 28 months of his sentence before he was finally released. He moved back to Boston and took a marketing job making $55,000 a year. He turns down every single request for an interview. A tech CEO ended up buying that Wesley Heights mansion for $4.5 million. The new owner didn't have a clue about its history until reporters started calling him for a comment. This lesson sent ripples all through the world of American politics. You're free to champion the cause of democratic socialism. You can push for the wealthy to pay higher taxes. You can fight for legislation that actually supports the working class. But you can't go out and make yourself filthy rich while you're doing it. You can't pocket millions from billionaires while acting like you're their biggest enemy. You can't live in a literal mansion while claiming to represent folks who can barely afford rent. You can't wear designer outfits that cost more than your voters' yearly salary while pretending you're just like them. Sooner or later, someone is going to go through the bank statements. Eventually, someone like Dan Bonino is going to track down every single wire transfer. At some point, the numbers just aren't going to make sense anymore. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez believed her personal brand was untouchable. She figured her narrative of victimhood and identity would keep her safe from any real accountability. She thought that by crying oppression, she could just wave away any investigation. It turns out she was dead wrong. The FBI held all the receipts, bank statements revealing millions from Soros, LLC paperwork exposing the shell game, unexplainable wire transfers, tax returns that didn't fit her lifestyle, photos of the mansion, and evidence that couldn't just be tweeted away. She had spent 6 years crafting an image as the true voice of the working class, the bartender who climbed to Congress to take on the system, the democratic socialist who was supposed to change everything. But the whole thing was a total fabrication. She was a grifter and a champagne socialist who saw that progressive politics was a profitable trend and used it to line her pockets, while her followers remained in poverty. That $4.2 million mansion was the smoking gun. That is exactly what her brand of democratic socialism actually purchased. It wasn't for the people she represented. It was for her. When the FBI traced the money back to Soros, back to the very billionaires she swore to fight, and back to the dark money networks she had slammed hundreds of times on Twitter, her entire manufactured image just crumbled. She ended up behind bars, not because of her race or because she took on the establishment, and not because of any political persecution. She went to prison for the simple reason that she broke the law. She accepted millions in shady payments that were disguised as campaign donations. She flagrantly violated federal laws. The evidence against her was simply undeniable. It only took the jury 3 days to reach a guilty verdict. The judge handed down her sentence without any second thoughts. And just like that, the Champagne Socialist became inmate number 6789308. This is the price you pay when you treat progressive politics like a get-rich-quick scheme. At the end of the day, the bank records always tell the real story. No number of Twitter followers or claims of being a victim can change basic math. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had to learn that lesson inside a federal prison cell. She went from posing on magazine covers and attending Met Galas to living in an 8x10 cell. She traded a $4 million mansion for a government-issued jumpsuit. She fell from being a democratic socialist icon to a convicted felon. Because, when it's all said and done, fraud always catches up to you. The receipts never lie. And now she's serving 6 years behind bars because those receipts proved she was the biggest fraud in the history of progressive politics.